for what's coming up on the top of the hour when we're going to be here as The Place. And Dr. Jones and Rhonda will be with me at that time. But I wanted to talk about a few things before we get started there. And that is, I want to talk about some things that I find to be a little bit ancient, perhaps in need of being remodeled. And what that would be is this. I think that theism and atheism are both a bit too ancient. I think we need to prepare for a very different kind of theism and a very different kind of atheism. And it seems to me that we have gone through various different forms of theism and atheism in the past, and both of them have evolved and changed, and both of them have, even more recently, both gone into kind of what, well, there'd be plenty of people who would deny this, but the way that I see it, both of them have gone into a very fundamentalist view of exactly what it is that they are asserting or demanding. And, of course, here, Lisa's gone, so my daughter brought this to me. I got some more arrogant bastard ale. Yes. This time she brings me a straw. That's awesome. Well, anyhow, I want to argue that we tend to think of theism and atheism as having been pretty much in the condition they're in now, and that they have always been that way. That, of course, is a mistake. So we tend to think of theism and atheism as 1.0, and we're recommending that we need a theism 2.0 and an atheism 2.0. Now, the truth is there's really many more versions of them that have been in existence. There was a time when theists and atheists were not defined as people who believed in God versus people who didn't believe in God, but rather as people who lived as if there were a God, whether they believed in one or not, and people who lived as if there was not a God, even if they happened to believe in one. So it used to, at one time, talk about lifestyle and the way that people lived, and what it was that they said about God by the way they lived, rather than what it is they said about God when they talked. And so that was at one time. Straw is interesting. A different way of looking at it. But as I was saying, they've both gone into kind of a fundamentalist mode, and I think that's really a downturn. It's not good, but both of them tend to deny that that's what they're in. Other than the fact that many theists who claim to be fundamentalists would claim to be fundamentalists only because they really rely on what they call the fundamentals of the faith. When we describe what it means to be a fundamentalist, or how they tend to behave, or what sort of personality profile tends to go with people who are that dogmatic in their assertions, many of them will try to deny that describes their position. They're just simply trying to be faithful to what they perceive as the truth. Now, there are usually three terms that run around, but there are really many that we could use. And some of these terms are helpful or useful. But I think it's important that you realize that whenever we use any of these terms, they actually mean what the person using them means by them, not what the general population might want to say they mean. And so today, when a person claims to be a theist, or is said to be a theist, I think it's important that we ask ourselves, okay, who's saying this, and what do they mean by saying that? And instead of hearing in it what we think the word ought to mean and hearing them as saying that, this is often something that happens in crazy arguments. People say something, and then we conclude various inferences from what they said based on what we demand those words mean, instead of recognizing that people mean what they mean when they say things, without regard to how well they may have articulated it, or how much they may have articulated it in a way that we quickly or easily comprehend. But we're more familiar with words like theist. We tend to think of a theist as somebody who does believe in God. We tend to think of an atheist as somebody who doesn't. believe in God and in these days. But it's really much stronger than that. Many theists, not all, but many theists today actually insist that there is a God. They don't just believe in God, they insist on it. They assert that it is true, which is a little different than simply believing in God. And many atheists, although they will argue that, well, just being an atheist only means you have no belief in God. Well, you may define the word that way, but it is a rare atheist. There are some of them, but it is a rare atheist who is simply somebody who has no belief in God. Many of them find a belief in God repugnant, or they find a belief in God irrational, or they have various other very strong and asserted opinions about theism. So they're not just people who don't happen to believe in God. They're often people with much stronger views than that, even though they will want to argue that that's all the word means, and then that's all they're going to take responsibility for, which is a little bit passive-aggressive and dishonest and disingenuous, if you ask me. I mean, if you're really having these strong attitudes and strong feelings about what theism is as an atheist, you've got to own that that's part of what it means for you to actually be an atheist. Because for all of us, whatever it is that we are, we don't compartmentalize ourselves in just being. We are who we are, and what we are is a multiplex of many things. And even though we can take a look at some of the features of some of the facets of who and what we are, it's not as if those facets exist entirely independent of any other facet about us. I mean, you know, I'm an audio engineer, I'm a YouTube broadcaster, I'm a guitar player, I'm a husband, I'm a dad, I'm all of these things. And it's possible that I can talk about each of these things independent of the others. But, you know, it's not as if you can, you know, take a look at my body and say, okay, this is the dad part, this is the theist part, this is the YouTube broadcaster part, this is the sound engineer part, and here's the musician. No, it's just I'm me, you know, and many of these things that are true about me fit together in ways that even I am unaware of. They all melt together into some sort of cohesive and at times even coherent whole, but not always coherent. And that's true for all of us. We're the people that we are. And so therefore, it's not possible to just be a theist or to just be an atheist, and that just means that you do believe or that you just don't have any beliefs. It's deeper than that for all of us. And so let's not get anal retentive about the terms and what they mean and refuse any ownership of anything other than the way we've liked to define it, so that we can absolve ourselves from having to answer to any, well, tough or inconvenient or irritating questions, you know. Now, there's such a thing as the agnostic theist. There's the agnostic. I should say that. You know, the agnostic is usually thought of as a person who doesn't believe that the conclusion can be drawn. Usually, that's what it means, or a person who, for whatever reason, when they ask, is there God, their response is, I don't really know. I don't know this. But it's possible to be a person who recognizes that intellectually they have no way of knowing this. They have no proof. They have no evidence. But push comes to shove, they find that they believe in God. And more often than not, that's not even an assertion on their part. More often, it's something that is really just a report of their condition. I look inside myself and I find, let's see, do I believe? Yeah, I do. Why? Oh, I'm not really sure why. When I stop to try to think of all the reasons that should justify it, I'm not really happy with any reasons I come up with, but I find that in the end, that's really where I'm at. That is where I'm at. And there are also some agnostic atheists. These people are really people who say, well, I'm without God. I don't deny the possibility. I just don't see it myself. And so I don't have a belief in God. And so there are some atheists who are that way. And you might even think of them more so as really being agnostic atheists. But, you know, something that is not really easily understood is that all of these people, agnostics, atheists, or theists, they come in all kinds of very different nuances. They're not all the same. They're not, and we make radical mistakes when we perceive all atheists as being pretty much the same, or all theists as pretty much the same, or all agnostics as pretty much the same. They're not. There's some, for example, just to go back to the agnostic concept, there's some agnostics who don't know, but hope that maybe someday they will. There are some agnostics who, as hard agnostics, don't believe it's possible to know. Some people have asked me, shouldn't I really call myself an atheist? An atheist being one of those other fancy words that tends to be thought of as a person who doesn't believe notions of God make any sense. Well, I'm not an atheist. I do believe that there are notions of God that make sense. There's just no way to know if they're true or not. And so there's a difference between an idea that makes sense and an idea that's true. You know, it's possible that one can think, well, you know, it makes sense, but I just don't know if it's the case. And so I'm definitely not one of those atheists. Very few people use that word to describe themselves. Very few people would even know what the word means if they heard it in describing themselves. But the truth is, the nuances are large, vast, and great. Something else that you might be aware of is that there are some people that you might even better describe as omnitheists. Now, an omnitheist is not the same thing as a polytheist. See, polytheists believe in all kinds of gods, but an omnitheist is a person who believes that although various different people believe in different gods, an omnitheist is a person who believes that God inarticulately is experienced by many people, but then perceived very differently by these different people in ways that are culturally defined. But in the end, this concept of God that they totally misunderstand is nonetheless the exact same God in every case. And that is really just a matter of anthropological and cultural distortions and stories that we tell ourselves that really represent the difference. In terms of the experience of this otherness of God, it's still, you know, all really the same. So they're not saying that all religions are the same or have the same values or what have you. They're just saying that it's kind of like if you have in a pre-scientific age, you have a number of different cultures that have a very different concept of what the atmosphere is. And you know, if you look at the pre-scientific age of most cultures, there was not a very strong or accurate understanding of what the atmosphere was. Well, they all still breathe air, you know. So even though their understanding and their claims and their assertions and their framework and all that other stuff, their theology of air was different. They all breathe air, and so there's such a thing as omnitheism, which is an attempt to say that in some ways it's a kind of agnostic theism, where I don't know, but this experience seems to maintain some sort of a common trigger in all people who are triggered thereby. Now, there's a lot of nonsense that atheists and theists are actually saying about each other. A lot of nonsense, because most of them pay attention to what it is they think, and they don't pay very much attention to what it is the others think. And this is even true for people who used to be atheists and are now theists, and people who used to be theists and are now atheists. It's as if they all become forgetful, and they don't appreciate or remember the kinds of things they used to think or that used to make sense to them. And as a result, the stronger a person becomes as an atheist, or the stronger they become as a theist, they have a tendency to radically misunderstand the other. It's not easy to understand somebody you don't agree with. Now, this is one of the reasons why I think it is really a terrible mistake to actually believe or disbelieve in God in a very certain or a dogmatic manner. I think it's good enough for most of us to simply appreciate and understand God notions and to appreciate and understand non-God notions. Understand them. Find them fascinating. Find them interesting. Find the fact that people try to get more detailed an interesting thing, and wonder what that says about human nature, and maybe learn something from it. But there's a number of odd things that we're saying about each other that really has no place. For example, I can't tell you how many times I've heard a theist claim that atheists are immoral. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard atheists claim that theists are deluded and irrational. To be honest with you, I don't think this is true. I don't think that atheists are immoral, nor do I think that theists are deluded or irrational. In fact, if anything, sometimes it tends to be more the other way around. The opposite is probably often very true. That is, there are a lot of theists who are quite immoral. And they're quite immoral because they're not allowing themselves to develop through the natural processes that human beings have, the moral development that we go through. No, it's been stilted for them. It's been halted for them because they're trying to live by a code of rules that are external to themselves, that they imagine come from God. And even if they did, they're still external. And so these people don't do right or wrong because they're invested in right or wrong. They do what's right or wrong because they were told what's right and what's wrong, and they don't really participate in the evaluations that closely themselves. And many of them, it is amazing to me, some of the horrible things that theists will think of as being perfectly fine simply because it's part of their religion. And so I think very often the opposite is true. Many times it's the theist who's really immoral. And so, that at least that's been my experience. And then many times it's the atheist who's, in my opinion, deluded or irrational. Many of them will say things like, well, there's no evidence. And that strikes me as a delusion because I think there's plenty of evidence. The problem isn't a lack of evidence. The problem is we have no methods by which to examine the evidence so as to reach a conclusion. The entire universe is evidence that there is no God, or the entire universe is evidence that there is. We just don't know which it's evidence for. So we got plenty of evidence. Evidence is not what you lack. That you got plenty of. What we don't have is something that all scientists lack until they find it, a methodology to study the evidence so as to know properly and verifiably what it is you can know from the evidence. We haven't been able to work that out. It's the nature of the question. That's a problem. It's not a problem of evidence, it's a problem of method. And to constantly harp on this lack of evidence is to be a little bit deluded. It involves a little bit of irrationality. Do you know what evidence is? Do you understand even the scientific definition of evidence? Do you understand how evidence comes to be understood as evidence and why some evidence is admissible and some evidence is not admissible in a particular argument, be it legal, scientific, or otherwise, So many times these people, when the atheists are going at the theists and when the theists are going at the atheists, they often get into these weird perceptions of each other, accusing the atheist of being immoral, accusing the theist of being irrational or deluded, believing in Sky Daddy and things like this. The truth is, I think that they both draw strawman caricatures of each other. And then they make fun of the caricatures or they ridicule the caricatures, which I would want to also add. Certainly not all theists and atheists do that. But when they do, they're really relying on a form of social pressure, of humiliating somebody, or of trying to make somebody perceive themselves as they should be humiliated, or that others can look down on them for certain things. What sort of goal is that? I mean, if a person is really wrong about something, where's your concern, your empathy, your care, your compassion for their error? Do you really want to understand them? Do you want to figure out how they got there so that if you really feel they're in the wrong place, you could help them unravel their error? What's this humiliating them or putting them down or criticizing them in such a way as making them out to be somehow a defective human, a defective thinker, a defective human being? It's just I don't get that. That strikes me as lacking in real integrity and real character, whether it comes from a theist or an atheist. It isn't dealing with human beings as they really are. It's dealing with them in the categories you can neatly sweep them into so you can dismiss them. And, this isn't really helping us any. It doesn't help the conversation. And it is certainly a big part of the debate, which ought not to be occurring. We need the conversation. The debate, it's useless. It's useless because both of you have nothing to debate. Anyhow, I had mentioned this before about how atheism is oftentimes claimed to be simply the absence of belief, and that's not really true. And theism is oftentimes claimed that it's the assertion that there's a God. But we are finding that that there are many atheists who are willing to admit that there's more to it than that for them, even though the word itself may outline simply that aspect of them. There is more to their atheism than simply the fact that they fit under the definition of the term. And many theists, however, are today really this is something that I think it's always been around. It's just that it hasn't always been voiced. Most people who have the kind of theism I'm about ready to talk about don't even see it as something worthy of talking about. There's nothing much to talk about. But there are many theists. They're people who believe in God, but they don't really know what to make of that belief. They actually find the idea of God fascinating. They also might find the idea of no God fascinating. It's kind of like the way some people think about outer space as kids. They think, well, does it go on forever or does it come to an end? Okay, well, if it comes to an end, then what comes after that? And they find themselves, they're struggling with this concept of infinitude. And they find that the infinitude and the lack of infinitude are both struggling conundrums that challenge the sensibility of coherence. So there seems to be a bit of dissonance to both of them when thoroughly thought about. And so there are theists today who find the notion of God and the notion of no God both very fascinatingly dissonant and interesting and both fascinatingly consonant. And so, it is not as if all theists are these egotistical fundamentalists. It's not true. In fact, I would say that most believers fall into that category. If you were to go to any church, except for perhaps the more fundamentalist churches, but it would even be true there, just not as true, that every church is filled with people who are there because it's just a part of a community that they enjoy being a part of. And it's meaningful for them to be there. They find the framework of the ideas useful and meaningful. But when it comes down to it, when they really think about it, they really don't know what to think. And they find that the kinds of thoughts they do think are fascinating and interesting. But in some ways, they're not really worried about coming to a conclusion. They don't even know if they need to come to a conclusion. What good is that going to do them? How are they going to do that? So there are many theists who are in that kind of thing. We even have to ask the question, why are we asking the question? Is this a question that possesses even a rational approach? Is it even a rational question? Are we trying to make rationality out of something that is an inarticulate experience or not an experience at all? Is it dealing with something that internally is innate, or is it something else? Are we really asking the right questions? We haven't demonstrated that that is true yet. There are arguments for God and arguments against the idea of God. I find all of those arguments to be disingenuous. They're an attempt not to prove that there is a God. They're not an attempt to prove that there is not a God. They are human beings unwilling to admit we haven't even figured out how to talk about this. And we're arguing about how we talk about it. And when we think we found a good way to talk about it, we think we found a good proof for God. I mean, regardless, let me say two things about that, and that is this. First of all, the first thing I like to say about it is this. You could come up with what sounds like an awesome and excellent argument for the existence of God. But all you have is an excellent argument for the existence of God. Still doesn't mean God exists. Whether or not God exists is quite another matter than whether or not you've articulated the answer to the question very well. And the same thing is true with being able to argue somehow that it just doesn't, make sense, that there just can't be any God. Okay, so, but all you've done is you've come up with a very, very interesting and very good argument. Still doesn't mean that's the case. So in many sense, we're just arguing about how we talk about God. We're not arguing about God. The second thing I want to say about it is this. There are many people who spend their time trying to develop really good arguments against this belief in God. And there's other people who spend a great deal of time trying to develop really good arguments on behalf of the belief of God. And they spend their time trying to develop these ideas and articulate them and shape them and make them stronger and stronger and stronger. But that is disingenuous. It's dishonest. And it's disingenuous and dishonest for this reason. The people who are doing this are already people who don't believe, or already people who do believe. And so even if they come up with what they think of as a strong argument for or against, that has nothing to do with why they are a theist or an atheist. And how can you be recommending an argument for God or an argument against God that is something that didn't even occur to you until well after you were a believer or a non-believer? So to me, I think that much of this argument is really nothing but us fluffing our feathers and trying to act as if, oh, I'm so intelligent, or I'm so faithful to God, or I'm so whatever. I don't know. But it certainly is not an argument for God or an argument against the existence of God. It's just a lot of rhetoric, pretty much. That's the biggest problem with it all. In the end, the issues of theism versus atheism turns to be a real focus upon arguments. And nobody's focusing on the nature of the question. Is this a question that can even be asked? Can we justify the question? Now, I'm not saying we have to justify the question. We have the question. It is a question. And I think that since it is a question, we can ask it. But sometimes people ask bad questions. And sometimes people ask bad questions because, well, they really want to know. It's still a bad question, but by a bad question, I mean it's a question that possesses no known way of going about finding an answer of any sort. And so the question is a bit weak to begin with. It's okay to have that kind of a question, but it's not okay to have that kind of a question and not be aware of it. It's important to be aware of it, that the question itself is a little bit odd in that whether there is or is not a God, how would any human being know this? There's plenty who claim to, but, so they claim to. All right, well, so they claim to. What does that mean? Well, not much. As it comes down to it, it doesn't mean anything. And so we find that we end up focusing on the arguments instead of the actual nature of the question. And I think that the reason we do that is because you can't make any headway if you're going to focus on the nature of the question. You end up in a conundrum. Oh, and people who believe in God don't want a conundrum. Oh, no, they want to be justified in their belief. And people who don't believe in a God, they don't want to be lost in a conundrum. Oh, no, they want to be justified in their non-belief. Well, I'm sorry. I would wish to rob both of you of any justification for it. You simply do or don't, for whatever reasons have been operating in your life. It either seems to make sense to you or doesn't seem to make sense to you. And I don't even know that we who are theists or we who are atheists, I don't think we even really understand all of the psychological and cognitive operations that have been going on inside of ourselves that bring us to that point. We simply can be honest about, perhaps, that it doesn't make sense to us, or it does make sense to us. And as a theist, I can tell you this. Let me give you my best argument for the existence of God. I got nothing. Sorry. But it would have to be, I'd have to be honest about the fact that even without an argument, I do find myself that there's this otherness that I sense a presence of, and it just, for reasons I don't know that they make necessarily compelling sense, it just seems to fit for me. Okay. Now, is that very compelling? I don't think so. In fact, I would be alarmed if any of you heard that and said, "Oh, Bob, you've convinced me." What? Look inside yourself. See where you're at. Allow yourself to be anywhere you may happen to be on this question. Don't feel that you need to conform to me or conform to anybody else. You don't have to conform to believers. You don't have to conform to atheists. You can just be who you are and find that this is where you happen to be. And if somebody asks you to explain it, you don't owe anybody any explanation for who and what you are. My goodness, life is a journey in attempting to figure it out. And I don't know, even at the age of 63, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to bed, woken up the next morning, starting a brand new day. And there's so much about life that I think I figured out, but there's also a ton of things about life I'm still bewildered about, So I'm just happy to be waking up in the morning and finding another day to be mine. And I'll continue to do that until I don't continue to do that. And I think that'll be just fine. It'll be the best I can do. Anyhow, that's pretty much the kinds of things that I wanted to talk about. And now that we've reached the top of the hour, we're going to soon be joined by Dr. Jones. And we're going to take from this pre-show moment, and we're going to become the place. And this is the place for intellectual honesty, for biblical honesty, and for spiritual honesty. And by that, we don't really necessarily know what that means. It's kind of a goal that we have. We're looking for what that would mean. When it comes to intellectual honesty, we're really concerned about what it is we can know, we can't know, what it is we think we know, what it is it seems to be so for us, or for whatever reasons it is, without necessarily requiring that we fit into any particular epistemological model that seems to be the going rage these days, And by spiritual honesty, we really want to be honest about what it is that we sense may be there that we cannot deal with empirically. And if we have that kind of a sense, we want to be honest about it. And we want to be honest about what it is that we have that sense. And we also want to be honest about the fact that we don't really have very many ways of knowing what that would be or what it means, And as many people think of spiritual as having more to do with the relational aspects that are not, the relational aspects of who we are and what we are as beings, and what it even means to be a being who is cognitively conscious and aware. That could be perhaps even something immaterial. We don't know. So we're trying to be honest about that experience. And when it comes to being biblically honest, by that, we're talking about dealing with this biblical.
Small to see.
We really want to be honest about all of that, and be honest about things that the text says, things that are brilliant, things that are not brilliant, things that are wonderfully useful and full of insight, and things that are just absolutely horrible, and all sorts of things in between. So we want to be honest about this text that seems to be most influential in our culture. Anyhow, there we are at the end of my pre-show jabber.
No jabber here.
I can hear Rhonda.
Hey, Bob.
And are you guys there now, ready to chit-chat?
We are ready to chit-chat. I mean, you put a lot on the table, as Dr. Jones would say. A lot.
Well, thanks.
So,
I enjoyed putting that there. Yeah.
your comments about trying to be as honest as possible. I think at the end of the day, when we go to bed at night, if we can say that we have been as honest as we possibly can, with the information that we have at this current time, I think that's a good day.
Sure.
You know.
And you know what else I would say is that it's been said often that honesty is the best policy. And that may be true. I think my policy is just as good, though.
Oh, what is that?
Just
Stretch the heck out of the truth.
Sometimes, yes. No, actually, to be honest with you,
yeah, I don't believe you now. So whatever you say.
Right, yes. To me, I think that our sense of honesty is sometimes a form of social manipulation. And although I think that the degree to which it is useful to be honest in any given social context indicates that that social context is a healthy one. But an unhealthy social context is not one in which honesty is a good policy. One sometimes needs to be guarded. Sometimes one needs to, if somebody comes to my door with a gun and angry and raging and saying, how many people are in their house right now? I'm not going to be honest.
Right.
This person has not deserved the honesty of that response. And I don't feel any moral obligation to be honest with somebody who is obviously interested in using the information they're asking me for in a manner that would be wrong, evil, or whatever. So there's a sense here in which I think that sometimes we're not honest about honesty.
Yes.
and the truth is, almost everybody recognizes that there are times when they would not be forthright. And I think that they are justified in that. But I don't think that that can be used as an excuse. And it is a bit loosey-goosey, so it can be easily abused. But I push back on the idea that honesty is always the best policy.
Okay. I'm going to let you have that one. I don't want anybody to think I'm trying to skirt the truth here. But tonight, I'm going to be as honest as possible. What about you, Daryl? Are you going to lay it on the line tonight?
Well, it depends on if somebody comes in and asks me with a gun and asks me how many people are in the house. Other than that.
No, what you say is, yeah, my wife's in the back room she has all the money. And then you go out the window.
That's a good point. I will say that I think that's a good point that Bob makes, though, because I've got a brother that is most of the time too honest. I mean, if he gets pulled over for going 1 mile an hour over the speed limit, he'll say, "Well, I think I ran the last 2 stop signs too."
Ooh.
I mean, I don't think you need to volunteer things like that.
Yeah.
My kids they tell me that I don't lie to them, but I will use a lot of loopholes. I don't want to lie to them now that they're adults. As kids, oh yeah, I'm going to lie to you if you're my child. Because you're not mature enough right now to handle the whole truth that I have for you. But as an adult, I'm going to give you just about an honest answer, but they'll say, is this the mom loophole or is it,
Well, I would say this: don't struggle with the question of, is this honest or is it not honest? Struggle with instead the question of, how can I meet the need here? What is legitimately useful, and to recognize that, I love that Geico ad with Honest Abe, where his wife comes out there and and it says, does this dress make my backside look big or something? And he hesitates and he's finally like, perhaps. Was Honest Abe really honest? If people are going to beat themselves up with your honest response, are you gonna be complicit in their beating themselves up?
Yeah, that's true.
So I'm not talking about coming up with excuses for withholding the truth for my own advantage, but I've got a justification for it. No, I'm talking about loving other people and really considering what's good for them, what's good for others, and recognizing that the kinds of things you tell people could have an impact and an outcome. And you're going to have to accept responsibility for that.
I agree, and it's like sometimes do I want to get emotionally invested in the rest of the scenario because I may just want to get in and out real quick. So I guess it depends on the relationship. You know, Daryl's wife Tina and I, we have a very honest relationship. I mean, we tell each other a lot of things. Probably our husbands don't even know, but we share these things, and these are like, take it to the grave things. And
Like,
so, yeah.
like what?
Oh no, I'll tell you all of her secrets.
Oh, okay.
None of
But
mine.
but in a sense, I think that what we're saying here is that I would agree that the higher the degree of honesty that can exist within a relationship, that is a sign of just how healthy that relationship really is.
Yeah.
You know, and and a very healthy relationship is one where both people have enough confidence in themselves and confidence in the other that they can deal with even the awkwardness of delicate truths.
Yes, absolutely. And it always reminds me of that Jack Nicholson movie, A Few Good Men or something like that. But I mean, you can't handle the truth. And it's true. If the American, this is the way I feel, if the American public would know every single thing about our national security or just different little bits and pieces of our government, sometimes we think we want to know it all, but you really don't because you can't handle that. You wouldn't be able to go to bed at night, probably.
And there's other things also. Unfortunately, there's other truths we don't know about that. I wish we did. I wish we knew more about that. Things being done in our name that I think most Americans are unaware of just exactly what our policies are in foreign countries and just exactly how these foreign people feel about the policies they know that we don't know that we have. Yeah, I think there'd be there's some honesty we could deal with. Of course, that's my radicalness, isn't it?
It is. That is your, yes, that's a good word for it.
Right. Yeah, and some of it comes from my drink.
Militant. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You're not worthy on the bottom. That's
Yes. This arrogant bastard ale. Yeah. It's good
and
stuff.
with a pink straw. You're really working it tonight.
My daughter brought this to me with a pink straw. I don't know what she meant by that, but it'll work.
That's
Yeah.
nice. All right, Daryl, what are you sipping on? And we'll go around the room and say what we're sipping on.
Ice water, boring.
Oh, Daryl. Well, we got iced tea, boring. So
Well, can I be honest with you?
please.
I bought 2 bottles of arrogant bastard ale just because I thought it looked very funny and it was fascinating. And I've saved the bottles. I rinsed them out and I filled them with water for the show.
See, you have misled us in believing you were drinking that ale. But see, that's the kind of loopholes that I do. Like, it's something just like that. I'm not lying to you, but you are making assumptions on something I'm doing.
Sure, I never told you that there was
That's
actually
right.
arrogant bastard ale in there.
That's right. That's the kind of my kids will catch me in. I said, "Well, I didn't lie to you. That you assume these things about it."
But you know what? You know what? I feel like our relationship just got a little closer.
That's right. He divulged his secrets.
That was brilliant. I like that, Daryl. Yes.
Now, we got some Umarun is in the house tonight with comments, and we love reading your comments. So please send them to us. We'll read them. Let's see. Okay, Jim Carrey, Ace Ventura,
The sheriff.
the sheriff.
That's Daryl.
It'd be me.
The sheriff, yeah, Daryl. Your nickname is the sheriff now. You're in the comments.
Oh,
Hey,
So which one of us is Ace Ventura?
Ace Ventura, pet detective.
Yeah. So is one of us? Are they just saying that one of us is really Ace Ventura, pet detective? But which one?
I don't know. I hope it's not me. Arrogant Bastard Ale, superb name. Loosey goosey, righty tighty. Does my okay? Yeah, some of these I'll have to pass on reading, but
Honest.
yes, honesty is not always the best policy. And somebody says, could you raise her sound level a bit? Thanks. That's Aaron. And it may need to be, sometimes when I get wound up, they have to back it down, but we're going to get wound up tonight because we are talking about Theism 2.0, and we're going to talk about atheism, theism. Is it okay to, back away from things that you were taught as a kid? Because we talked about that tonight at our 6 o'clock meeting. The scripture says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old he won't depart from it. And then I said, everybody in this room has departed from the training that they received as a child. I'm talking about biblical training. Some people were brought up Catholic and now they're not. Now they're hovering over agnosticism. I was brought up Southern Baptist. Now I'm not, even though I am a Jesus believer and definitely, feel this otherness that we talk about. But as far as Southern Baptist doctrine goes, no way. We had a Church of Christ person in here. No way I'm a Church of Christ believer. So everybody in the room was a
Either. Yeah.
no.
Can I say something, though, about that verse? I think if we take a look at Jewish culture, we will see that it was very early on a culture that liked to be a little more multi-axial than Greek culture was. And they oftentimes enjoyed looking at things from multiple different angles. And in fact, it's probably a truism that when you're trying to interpret Jewish wisdom, that you should listen to the kinds of things they say as merely, now, here's one way you could think about it, but they just don't prefix it that way. And so therefore, I'm more persuaded that when it says, raise up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it, that what it was really recommending was this: find the direction that is most natural to this child and raise him up in that direction.
Right.
And when he is old, he won't depart from it.
Well, that's what Ruthie said.
Yeah.
I mean, so I never ever considered that. What about you, Daryl?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I know Dr. Jones never was an advocate of was referred to as the Amplified Bible, but they thought that, yeah. But I remember the way that verse read in that Bible, oddly enough. It stated, train up a child in the way he should go, in keeping with his individual gift or bent. And so, it threw in that idea of, discover what about that child, the direction that he seems to be leaning, and help him in that direction. So it said similar to what Bob was just saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me give a plug for Dr. Phil too. He's the guy whose show I hate and whose books I've really enjoyed. In his book Family First, he even recommended your parental style. You should experiment with a few parental styles and don't settle on the one that you like the most. Settle on the one that seems to be most effective for the development of your child. It's just a similar notion, similar idea there.
I get that. Yeah, absolutely. What do you say, Dr. Jones?
Wow, I'm interested in this topic, and maybe we need to make it clear and possibly clearer. So many times we find people taking these strong positions, and I'm talking about positions that have been, in a sense, just talked about and talked about and talked about and talked about, and it becomes a tiring conversation that goes nowhere. And what I'm talking about is theism and atheism. When you look at the basics of theism, and I'm simply talking about just when people assert or affirm that there is a God, and when others affirm that there is no God, those are positions that I think that people are moving away from. In other words, I think that there are more people these days in theism that are in flux. That is, when it comes to understanding X, Y, and Z. And let me explain this. Typically, theists are, and I'm talking about today's theists, this is not true of fundamentalists, most fundamentalists that would be, but typically theists today are willing to say, yeah, I can look at the facts, I can agree with the facts. However, when it comes to their quote-unquote faith, they will simply say, I do understand that this is dogmatic. For instance, even in Calvinism, and I would argue that R.C. Sproul is extremely honest about his position in theology. He claims that his faith is presuppositional faith. It's not, faith in God without presupposing that there is a God. And we need to be very, very careful in stating, that's not a rational position, simply because this guy admits I'm presupposing that there is a God, and based upon that presupposition, I'm going to have faith. And so all of the modeling that R.C. Sproul does, that is in the context of the 5 points of Calvinism, or as a Calvinist, he does so in presuppositionalism, not in the context of a Scientific Bruggenkate show, but in the context of something that would allow him, in a sense, to move forward with fact. In other words, so many times theists are faced with facts that push back on their understanding or their perspective of what they call truth, or what the writers of the Bible were writing. And so we've seen a lot of adjustments, throughout the ages, and I think that this is wonderful. I'm thankful that theists are willing to look at the text and not get stuck. In fact, we have better translation models today than we've ever had. Dr. Ann Nyland, one of the best lexical theorists to date, has published a particular work that reflects some excellent science, and I'm talking about lexical theory. And in her work with lexical theory, she has suggested some things that I think that some people are really annoyed about, and it troubles me because she has proven, that is, lexically speaking, that is, by demonstrable theory, that in the context of how linguistics works with ancient writings, she has demonstrated over and over again how it would be quite illiterate to suggest that we need to think of homosexuality as something that these ancient writers were against. And so today we have a lot of people, especially some atheists, who are so against, and I'm not talking about all atheists, I'm just talking about some atheists. Some atheists are upset at that because they think that people are just making up shit.
Yeah, they think that we want to be in the mainstream, and we want to jump on the bandwagon of what's really popular in society nowadays, and so we're gonna get on the bandwagon of the LGBT community, and that's not really it. For one thing, our hearts are motivated in that way to start with, but also people are coming out, if you do want to hold to Scripture, they're coming out with these translations, and it's not just to be politically correct or socially, correct. It's because new information, new evidence, new techniques in translation theory have come about, and it's not that we're trying to fit in. So that, to me, that I get taken aback by those that say that.
Well, I think there was a time in which there were people, they were just extremely reckless with the text, and they did come up with, this Holy Ghost Greek crap, and it did throw everything into a Christian box. However, Ann Nyland is certainly not a Christian. She's not trying to advocate a certain kind of theology at all. In fact, theology is not something that she advocates in the sense that most theists do. She's simply a lexical theorist. And so Her approach was simply to look at the text and use an oblique technique, that is, in transport, to suggest what is there. That is based upon syntagmatic and paradigmatic analysis. And this we should appreciate. And so these kinds of people are working long and hard on the text, and yet some people are thinking, oh, this just so happens to be when, now we have, gay rights and all of that, and, this book was published in 2005 and yada, yada, yada. But many theists have been making some strong statements for years about equality. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Martin Luther King Jr., he was a theist, and he was all about equality. And we can go back in time, and I'm talking about over the last 100 to 200 years, and we're going to find many theists pushing back on these models that were just extremely insufficient. And so please understand that tonight's show is not about bashing anyone. It's simply saying, there was a model of theism, yes, years ago, that many people got stuck in, and that's unfortunate. But I would argue that many people got stuck in a model of atheism that possibly, one might need to consider, quite ancient, as Bob put it earlier in the show. And I think that we need to move away from theism and atheism and move into something that I would call Theism 2.0. And the reason that I think that we need Theism 2.0, I think that people need to have the liberty to say, if I'm a part of Theism 2.0, that doesn't mean that I believe in God. It simply means that I'm willing to look at the text, and I can use the text if I like. I can use the God term. I can simply use it as a literary device. But I don't have to be construed as someone who actually believes in the existence of God. Someone can believe in the usefulness, namely of the God term, and be a part of what we call Theism 2.0. Now, the point is, humanists, for the most part, those who are similar to what I am, are looking for the bar to be raised, that is, in the context of humanity. And sometimes what we do is we use terminology that would help raise that bar, and sometimes I think that we can, theistically model something that would raise the bar. And so some people would say, oh, yeah, that's good, and others would push back. But Theism 2.0 is simply an attempt, if you will, to get rid of this, tribalistic approach of that group versus another group and trying to take positions. I think that people are better off understanding positions,
Right.
and being multi-axial, if you will, looking at both sides of the coin, looking at it as if we are not ones who want to claim certainty. And so that's what I think really needs to be advocated here tonight, because when we look at political science, wow, we're looking at the kind of science that would suggest that we're all tribalistic and we do things all the time based upon dogmatic this and that all the time. And yet so many people are claiming today, oh, no, to me it's all about empiricism and science. And that's ridiculous. I mean, we do have problems. That is, we get dogmatic, and I am certainly one that admits to my dogmatism. Some of my dogmatism I enjoy. I know that it's simply dogmatism, and I can admit to it, and that's the nice thing about it.
There's a number of things I'm dogmatic about, and some that are even disturbing. The other day, I even posted under something Lisa said. I said, "Isn't she awesome?" And she asked me to remove it, so I did. But, I'm rather dogmatic about that.
See, I claim that Rhonda is God. That's Theism 2.0 right there. Yeah.
Yeah, but you just don't understand that we I don't know. We just don't really like that out in the public square.
Perhaps.
What is that? That you're God?
Well,
The
she's
compliments
awesome,
and
or yeah, we women,
Okay.
y'all think we
Hilda was
do.
drawing attention to herself when she was really trying to make a comment about someone else. And that's, well, I can see, yeah, I can see that, but she's still awesome. And
Of course.
yeah, I can't help it. So sometimes I just, a little bit, I dribble with my mouth instead of my basketball. So what can I say?
Many questions are being asked because one question was asked, is Theism 2.0 an idea from NCG or the New Covenant Group? I think that it is. I don't know that anyone else is really trying to push this forward. I would push it forward. And there are others. I think it was Alan who pushed Atheism 2.0 forward. My point about Theism 2.0 being, the kind of model that we all need, it's not like it has, this position that says, oh, it's all about, let's take this position. It's not likely that God exists. It's all about trying to look at all of the different models.
Right.
It's taking that multi-axial approach. In other words, it's the willingness to say, let's keep our minds open, let's look at it all, and let's admit to our sense of sometimes being completely irrational. I can get extremely irrational, Bob. Just ask my wife.
I used to work with an oil company, and we had a sales department there where we'd have to talk about certain ideas, the things that we would do, whether we'd sell something or not. And one of the things that I always try to recommend in these meetings is that, okay, let's get ideas out on the table. And no matter what the idea is, let's see if we can love that idea for about 15 minutes. And let's see if we can hate that idea for 15 minutes. Everybody get involved in it. There's a great deal you can learn by doing that. And one of the most wonderful lessons I learned, I had a speech teacher in college who required us to go find somebody else in the class with whom we disagreed with about some particular topic. And then both of us were required to offer a speech attempting to express clearly and as winsomely as possible the point of view of the other person. Wow, that was, I loved the exercise. And, the last thing I want to say about that is this, that I even talking to a science teacher once about the problems in trying to teach evolution, sometimes even to homeschoolers and other people, I said, well, the problem is you're not teaching evolution. You're trying to persuade people that it's true. It doesn't matter if it's true. What is the theory? What is the evidence? What is it that require of them that they at least understand it? They don't have to believe it. Will they understand it? And indeed, I would say that in true science, theories are mere explanations. And as a result, they're to be understood. It doesn't matter whether you believe them or not. In fact, as a good scientist, you should always be a little bit skeptical and say, well, evidence may come along that forces us to now kind of reshape a different theory. And Einstein reshaped all kinds of theories about gravity, about the nature of space itself, and so forth. And science didn't die or suffer a stroke. We just moved things forward. And sometimes I think it's that way about Theism 2.0. It's not about believing in God. It's not about not believing in God. It's about talking about these ideas, seeking to understand them. And I'll tell you, if as a theist you can't entertain how things would make sense if there was no God, then you're not thinking hard enough. And if as an atheist you can't honestly put forth an idea and understand how this might fit into how there could be a God, maybe there's certain kinds of gods that couldn't exist, but I mean, it seemed to me we need to stretch this because there's nothing there that you need to believe or not believe. But can we entertain these notions? Can we find something fascinating about them, or can we find something fascinating about putting them aside? That's what we're talking about in the 2.0. We're talking about really an exploration of these notions and these ideas rather than a judgment upon other people and their skill and their rationality and whether or not they really qualify to be called critical thinkers or other things like that. We just want to move the place forward so that people can have these conversations and do with it what they will personally.
I would like to focus on development. I realize that people have, let's call it intellectual capacities, but let's look at the manner in which all of us develop. If we keep theist in this theist box, the question would be, how is that theist going to develop? That scares me if that happens. And the same thing is true with an atheist. If you keep an atheist, let's say, in this box of atheism, I'm really concerned about the development, that is, the process of development concerning that individual who is in that particular box. And what I'm suggesting is that in Theism 2.0, it gives me the advantage of saying, okay, I can put on my glasses, and then I can put on someone else's glasses, their shoes, walk in their shoes. I can look at it, this and that through many different lenses. I can walk in many shoes. I can take different approaches and feel good about it. It's not about trying to come to a conclusion without leaving room enough for it to be falsified. And so in a very similar sense, it's about taking, both science and the arts and allowing things to be, criticized and yet applauded, allow things to just inspire us, and yet at the same time, there's a lot of pushback to happen. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. And what are your thoughts on that, honey?
Yeah, I mean, I get that. One thing I do want to stress is that I guess it seems like I'm being an apologist for theism, but really, nowadays, most theists, I'll use that term loosely, are more reasonable than, we're given credit for. And I want to just put that on the table. It's like saying everybody in the South has a Confederate flag in their front yard and they're, shooting, they're shotguns in the air, and they have tobacco and spitting. That's not how we are, all of us in the South. And that's the same thing about theists. We are coming into our own, with more reason, and we're not as reckless in our thinking as we once were. And so to paint us with the old brush that has, stained with, they don't care about evidence, they're just emotional, they're this and that. You need to actually revisit us and understand where we're coming from. And in turn, we need to do the same thing with those, that are different than us. Like Bob said about the 15 minutes, give somebody 15 minutes and listen to their story. Try to like it, and then maybe try to dislike it. And so just know that we are reasonable more so than ever before. And so maybe a force, that needs to be reckoned with.
Everybody starts out as a reckless thinker. It comes from the naivete of, because we all have to develop an awareness of what it is that needs to be considered. And we need to discover the mistakes we're making and just how broad and requiring a question can be. It's not always immediately obvious. That's something that has to be learned. So I think that all of us, no matter what we have to say about the God question, we can all start out a bit reckless, and hopefully with a few years under our belt, we should all be a little more nuanced, a little more careful, and far more gentle
Yes.
in matters. Yeah.
I have a question that I'd like to throw out there. Tonight we have three older gentlemen and a young lady. That's that's who we have here. And when I say older gentlemen, we come from a very interesting time in history that we're all familiar with. And there was a push back in the, I might as well go ahead and say it, the 60s, around that time.
Sure.
It seemed like there was a lot being said about love and about us all coming together. It was a push toward humanity. And really, I see it as a humanistic movement. And even to the point that the Bee Gees got involved. I mean, they put out a lyric in a song that said, there's only one race. And, when I think back on those times, I can't help but wonder. Now, I know when you say theism, that is a pretty broad term. It covers a lot of different beliefs. But it seems like, for the most part, theism doesn't look at humanity as one race. It goes back to that tribal idea of this group, that group versus, and theism is renowned for that. And I can't help but wonder, and this is my question, is it possible that the idea of humanism in its purest form, just it being about humanity and not any particular tribe, if people that have gone that direction feel like that it has to be done outside of theism, that there's not really God or gods that represent that idea, and so it needs to eliminate the idea of God in order to embrace humanity as just one race with no barriers.
I
And
would think that that any humanism that requires that one be atheistic or that requires that one be theistic is not humanism. It is another form of tribalism. So that if we're going to focus on the value of being human, the dignity of being human, and the rights of human beings to be the human beings that they are, I think that includes the fact that some of them will turn out to be people who have varyingly different notions about God questions, and your humanism has to embrace them instead of force them to be shoehorned into some sort of box that works well for your humanism. That's not humanism.
One of the things that I want to put on the table tonight, I really don't want to be ambiguous about this. And this may really upset some people because so many people, give me call after, they give me so many calls trying to find out, biblical answers. It's like, oh yeah, if we parrot Jesus, we're doing wonderful. And I keep saying, the worst thing that we can do is to continue to parrot Jesus. I think that if Jesus were alive, walking the face of the earth again, I think that he would be telling us, why didn't you guys move on? I mean, I was speaking to a bunch of people who were relegated to a certain thing. And I told you guys that, there are a lot better things going on in the future if you just take advantage of them. And so my point is, it may be true that theists need to let go of theism altogether, and atheists need to let go of atheism altogether, and let's form a group that's called something like theism, not theism 2.0, I should say, simply because I think that we need to explore what this might look like, poetically speaking. Sometimes, you can explore the dynamics of poetry, that is, of those ancient writers of the past, and sometimes we can resonate with it, and sometimes we can't. But why can't we leave things on the table? I'm for that. In other words, this is why I do like the notion of putting theism 2.0 on the table without thinking that you've got to have the pushback. In other words, I keep saying that theism has nothing, atheism has nothing. Therefore, why continue down those streams? Why not walk away from them and form something and say, hey, let's look at theism and let's wrestle with why some of us are believing. We keep talking about this otherness. We keep talking about this presence. Let's use me as a guinea pig. Let's experiment on me. I'd like to find out why there is, what this otherness is, this presence is. I really want to know, but yet at the same time, I find that what I am experiencing on a daily basis is quite useful for me. I know that everyone is not experiencing what I'm experiencing, but what they are experiencing, I would like to know what they are experiencing, and I would like to share. I would like humanity to become, more interested in itself. I really think that we need to leave, to the best of our ability, these notions of tribalistic behavior, and I think that in raising the bar, we could do so if we moved into something like Theism 2.0, or we could even call it something different. I'm not really stuck on the name. I'm just attempting to reach further, if that makes sense.
So you're not worried about whether or not these other people are experiencing dark and depraved ideas, and maybe I'm saying this facetiously. Sometimes we talk about, sometimes theists talk about atheists as if, they touch themselves in places that we can't talk about. We moralize so many odd, weird things that we basically we try to turn atheists sometimes into boogeymen, or into just depraved individuals. And now I can admit that I was at one time very guilty of that when I was strong into my experimental exploration of fundamentalism. I went into that with a passion, and came out of it with a passion too, I might admit. So it was. I look back in those days. I hope I've learned from them. I feel sometimes a little bit embarrassed over the arrogance of it all, But I'm glad I learned from it, and that I kind of moved along and out of that. And indeed, we've said this many times, Dr. Jones. You and I both said that it's in our discussion with atheists that we learned so much.
Certainly.
That changed the kind of theism we have.
Exactly.
We respected. I'll tell you one thing. As I learned linguistics, I respected the academic integrity
Yes.
of the field.
Yes.
And I let it speak to me, and I let it change the kind of thoughts that I had about the biblical text, because, well, I had to be honest, and none of that. But I tell you, not that everybody has to study linguistics, but it's fascinating.
It is, but it's time to raise the bar. I get that. I needed atheists to intervene in my life.
Yeah.
I get that, but wow.
We can rescue each other in many ways, I'm telling you.
Yes, we need to move on.
Yeah. No, speaking of moving on, Bob, we have a question directly to be asked of you. It came in. So buckle your seatbelt. Is it better to raise our children without any religion at all and let them decide for themselves once they become adults? Bob, that's to you.
Okay. The answer to that is no. It sounds like a good idea, but I say no. And the reason is because, and I don't know if people will like hearing this, but the truth is the child from the moment of birth goes through various different cognitive stages and physical stages where they're developing skills and abilities. spatial capacities, reasonings, the ability to, there's a period of time when the human organism is developing stereoscopic vision, and many of these cognitive developments must take place within the window of when the organism is focusing on them. And if they don't, otherwise these become things they can't do. I was listening to lectures of a teacher on learning, who talks about how when she was a child, she happened to be wearing a patch or some sort of they were going through some sort of a medical condition at the time that her body was going through stereoscopic development. And to this day, she has no stereoscopic vision and cannot judge the depth. I mean, she can't throw a tennis ball up into the air and smack it with a tennis racket. She cannot judge she has no depth perception of that nature. I think that there are questions that we all have about the nature of reality. And I think that these questions start happening very early on. And I think that we have to start somewhere. And it takes certain skills that are being exercised and developed by being used, so that I do think that there are things we can teach our kids that is really very abusive, but we can't just refrain from them struggling with certain ideas until they're adults, because the way you become an adult is to deal with a framework, find the way it works, the way it doesn't work, examine it, think about it, question it. And that's part of what it takes to become an adult. So if you were to refrain from saying anything about this or even exposing your kids to this, by the time they become adults, they won't have the skills or the abilities to even know how to deal with these questions. And I think that in some ways, this is often true of strong biblical religion. A lot, not all, but a lot of the strongest converts to biblical religion are people who really didn't know anything about religion until they got converted, and then they thought they knew everything. Whereas had they dealt with some of these questions, look at what happened. We talked about this earlier. Who among us in this discussion is where we were when we grew up?
Sure.
Certainly where I grew up from was a starting point. Sure. But when I finally developed legs and responsibility, I managed to find my way, my place, and I was open to it. And I think that if we can encourage that kind of thing, that, you certainly don't want to indoctrinate your kids or punish them or make sure that they understand this and that about but I don't think you need to avoid raising your children in a religious belief or in a religious notion or as an idea, as a framework. They'll move along, and I don't. In fact, I think it can actually inhibit their development if they don't at least start with that framework. So I'd say it might sound like an idea, but you're assuming the question, if that makes sense to you, that you should just wait until they're an adult. It assumes that adults somehow just become adults. Give them 18 years and they pop out as an adult. That's not true. Becoming an adult is a developmental process that is a multiplex. Many of those developments can happen many of those particular developments can happen at any time. Some of those developments can only happen at certain periods of time. Language in particular is one of them. If you don't acquire a native tongue by the age of 7, the longer after the age of 7, the more difficult it will be for you to become an eloquent, adequate speaker of a native tongue. So it's just a part of the development. So that's my view on it.
That's Bob's 2 coppers right there. We do have a suggestion to, instead of maybe Theism 2.0, to call it Mentballism 2015, maybe.
Mentballism.
Mentballism.
Let's love this idea for about 15 minutes.
Yeah, let's love it. And then it appears we may have some people that are reflecting ignorance on the panel tonight.
Well,
I mean, when it comes to atheism, I've heard so many people suggest this and that. And I think that Ozzy, is right in that if one is an atheist, one is taking a position, and there is a burden of proof that is according to Ozzy's argument. He doesn't leave the burden of proof just in the court that is for the theist, but he also leaves that also in the lap of the atheist as well. And I think that Ozzy is very even-handed about that, and I would suggest that all of us listen to his wisdom, because he's very good at really getting very specific and to the point about atheism and theism. And this is why I think that we need to go to a 2.0, whether we call it Theism 2.0 or Mint-Ballism 2.0, I don't know. But I think that we need to move on. We've got to raise the bar, because the conversation has to be something that would give us a reason to start looking namely at the same evidence together and coming to some of the same conclusions because of the evidence. And there's no sense in us pretending like that we can't. I mean, we can.
Could I ask a question here?
Yes.
I mean, it seems to me that perhaps some of the evidence is at this point in time, based on what it is we know about the evidence, some of the evidence is ambiguous. And I think that because it's ambiguous, there needs to be a great deal of tolerance for people to kind of settle that ambiguity in ways that they settle it. I would even want to take what Ozzy said and push it a little bit further, in that, this concept of burden of proof. And I do think you're right, that he was even-handed in that, and that if somebody believes that something is the case that there is a God, or the case that there's not a God, he says they both share an equal burden. Now, I would argue, though, that this burden does tend to be a little bit argumentative. I would argue that the only time you have a burden is if you're trying to persuade somebody else. But the truth, as far as I can tell, most people who are atheists or theists, I don't know that we really know why we're there. I think we have ideas about why we're there, but you can't. It's like, do I like chocolate? Do I think chocolate's better than vanilla? Can I prove that? I have no burden of proof that chocolate is better, but I can be honest about the fact that I like chocolate more than I like vanilla. That I can be honest about. But the only time I have a burden of proof is if I want to persuade you that chocolate is better than vanilla, which is kind of also stupid, because I think your taste buds can relate to you well enough as to which one you find to be better. And I think you're better off going with that, than my proof,
Well, I do want to read Varied Vid's comment. Varied Vid said that atheism is not a thing. It's nothing more than the absence or rejection of theism. It is therefore a default position and not something that can be left. To assert it is only reflects ignorance.
Wow, I strongly disagree with that for various reasons. And I know that Ozzy would also strongly disagree with that. There is no default position that is a universal default position. There is a default position, but that's where each person finds themselves. It's kind of like, is there a default sexual orientation? It's true that some people, when they reach puberty, discover they're heterosexuals. There's some people, when they reach puberty, discover they're not. It's not as if one is the justified default. It just is, But I would also argue that although the word atheism only refers to the absence of a God notion, very few atheists are really of that position. They're not just of the position that they don't have a belief in a God. Many of them are of the position there is no God.
Right.
And so they are making an assertion, although the assertion isn't required to be an atheist. It's true that atheism just means without God. But it also used to be true that there were atheists who believed in God. They just didn't live with God, you know. They lived as if there were no God, or they ignored the God that they believed may have existed, and that was considered atheism because they were without God. You know, it's not that, it's kind of like, you know, a person who's not divorced but no longer living with their spouse is, you know, without a working marriage, you know, but that doesn't mean they're not married or that they don't, you know, don't have any, perhaps even legal obligations. So I think that is, in my opinion, an attempt to sidestep the situation. However, going back to what I said earlier, there's still no burden of proof there. If you're just without God and you have no belief in God, you don't owe anybody an explanation for that. The only time you ever actually owe anybody an explanation for that is if you're trying to persuade them to also join you in believing there's no God. So, you know, I think they're conflating the meaning of the word with the actual condition and position that they are at. And also kind of mixing up the idea of, well, where is it that you're at and where is it you'd like other people to be at, you know? And, you know, if you're live and let live, then you have no burden of proof for anybody, you know?
Here's probably the toughest question of tonight, and this comes by...
You say it.
Yeah. Is it Umram? There you go.
I always say
I like the way that you're saying that. That's wonderful. He asked, and I think that he's referring to you, Bob, is the default sexuality agnosticism?
The default sexuality Gnosticism. No, I think this person is a delightful human being, but they are a little confused. It's a good question, though. Yeah.
I guess they're thinking, well, we start out maybe not knowing, or do you start out strong, you know, at the gate, like I really know?
You know, when it comes to children, we don't know what children think because it appears to be that the child is still trying to figure out the world. And as a result, it is believed that children are learning about things in general and not things in specific. And this is one of the theories as to why child development experts believe that most people don't have memories of specific events prior to the age of 4. It's not because their memory wasn't functioning. It's that their memory was busy developing generalities, not specifics. And it wasn't until they actually settled into a set of specifics that they could then, or excuse me, of generalities, that they could then see how certain specific cases either confirm or modify or sophisticate the generalities. And so that a child will often have a clear sense of what some of the more generalities may have been for childhood, but they just don't have specific memories. And so the truth is, I don't know that we know what the specifics were of any child in their sense of this. So what is the default? It's only if we can recall earlier sensations or thoughts or ideas that we had. And that can be very difficult. I know because, first of all, you're talking about something that happened a long time ago. Memories change. Who at the age of 30 really accurately remembers what they were thinking at the age of 6? You know, I do recall at the age of 6 having a very strong sense of God's presence. Now, why did I have that? I don't really know. I have a few incidents that I can point to that I can remember that perhaps help to explain it, but that's just the way I remember it. You know, who knows? I don't know that I don't know if we know if there's any such thing as a default position, or that we could ever explain it. I think Michael Shermer does a good job of trying to argue against it as the default position. And his book is he wrote a book called The Believing Brain. And although I would disagree with a lot of his conclusions, I think he really explores the issue very well.
He does try to explore it. Daryl, I'm going to put something on you that you may not want to have on you. But now Ryan is coming to us and being very honest and upfront. And Ryan says, I don't believe in any God that I have been presented with or have looked into as of yet. What do you think about that, Daryl?
Well, I would say to Ryan, way to go. I don't blame you. And I think you have that option. Uh, I'm not far from there. I mean, I'm similar to Bob as far as, somewhat convinced there is a God. But as far as describing or explaining, I think there's much to discover there. And I think the reason that we haven't possibly come to better conclusions is because most people that believe in a God or gods are locked into a certain idea. And many of them feel like if they deviate from that idea, that it's anywhere from betrayal to dangerous, life threatening, eternity threatening.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost as if for a lot of theists, it's wrong or bad to deny the God that you uh, have come to believe in, or to question anything about that God. But I think that's one of the healthiest things that a theist could do. Bring it all into question. If it's real, what's the problem? You know?
Yeah, let me give you an analogy here in my response to that. Let's say that we take just an ordinary person and we're going to put them in the boxing ring with a professional boxer. And we're going to present them with various different techniques that they might be able to use in that boxing ring. I don't think they're going to find any of those techniques we present them with as being useful. And that's because that's not how you begin boxing. You don't begin boxing by getting in the ring with some pro. There's basics you have to learn, and you have to go through this process. This person says that there's no concept of God that they've been presented with that made sense to them. Well, I think that's true of even most theists, that they have not found anything that makes sense to them. And although there are many theists who would come to a point where they conform to a particular group, that's really something they kind of acquire over time. As far as I can tell, most theists and become theists because they really already are. And when they become a particular kind of theist, it's because they adopt that as an attempt to explain something that already exists inside of them. They have a sense of God. They just don't understand that sense. And then along comes somebody and teaches them, well, you see, God is immutable and he's omniscient and and they go, oh. And then they fall in line with that. But I don't think there's anybody who's even within the fundamentalist camp who had the fundamentalist God presented to them said, oh, well, that makes sense. I think I'll buy into this. I don't think that even happens there. So my suggestion is this. Good for you. I agree with what Daryl said. Kudos. That's you're going about it pretty well. But I'll tell you this: if you're ever going to believe in God, it's not going to be because of anything anybody tells you. It's going to be because this is just something that seems to emerge from within yourself, simply because this is what seems to be your experience. And look there or don't look anywhere at all. But you certainly don't need anything from anybody else, because obviously, that's just an anthropological belief in God. And we do have people who are believers in God just because that's the culture they were growing up in. And these people don't really ever become what I would call remarkable believers necessarily. And I'm not even faulting them for being that. I'm just saying that's not the same sort of theism as really believing in God. They're just kind of, following the status quo. There's a lot of people who are Republicans or Democrats simply because, well, that's what they signed up for when they've registered to vote, and that's just what they've been doing, this is not an intellectual question. And if you're pursuing it as an intellectual question, you're really going to find yourself obligated to reject everything you hear. You have to.
I would give another example. I would say there's plenty of people that have never met my wife, and Ryan would be one of them, for example. I could describe her like this. I could say she's an extremely mean person. And most people, after they meet her, they don't like her because she's so mean and she's just terrible. And I could go on. I'm not going to because there's no point, and it would all be lies. But someone who had never met her, doesn't know anything about her, wouldn't know the difference. And probably, should she come their way and there be the idea this could be Daryl's wife, they would say, no, there's no way, because I mean, she doesn't fit the description at all. And I think that that's more likely than not when it comes to most of the God notions. I think if let's just say God decided to go ahead and expose himself to all of us at the same time and say, here I am, I'm like this. Probably all notions would go down the tube, or at least most of them.
That's good. We do
Yeah, it
have a
is.
confession tonight. That's very good, Daryl. We have someone who has confessed. Ryan says, as a mint ballist, I will strive to believe in the possibility of God while keeping an open mind to the idea that I am all alone and just talking to myself.
How can you ask anything more?
Hey, that's awesome. And so
We
if tonight, and here's the altar call here, if you want to become a mint ballist, that is so good.
Can we clarify something about atheism and theism 2.0? There is no need to be either. You know, it's not as if there's a goal here.
Exactly.
There isn't. And it's not like, well, see, how can I get myself around to being a believer? Well, why would you pursue such a thing as that? That's what a waste of time.
So
You know-
what you're saying is, in Theism 2.0, people would say, when asked, what are you? A person would say, well, I'm a mint ballist, or I'm a bowler, or
Yeah.
I'm a fisherman, or, a plumber, or a welder.
I'm a dolphin speech interpreter.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if somebody really says to themselves in their heart, I really would like to be a believer, don't you think, just go for it, Absolutely. See if it happens for you.
Yeah, be open to it, but it's not the kind of thing that you can force. I mean, you really can't. In fact, I really think that there are many atheists who are atheists because they've tried to force this and they discovered it can't be forced, and so they've made this as a decision. And I also think that there are a lot of theists who I don't think of it as a healthy theism, who've become theists because they feel so inadequate and they want so much help that Sky Daddy sounds to them like the way out of all the grief of life. Come on. That's an irresponsible way of dealing with your life, and so I think that there are ill-advised ways of going about trying to become a theist or an atheist, so be who you are, let this become what it may, and
Yeah.
just go with the flow here. This is not the kind of thing for which there is any evidence or proof that we can make sense of. And so, the truth is, you may find, I mean, I don't know where Frank Schaeffer is all the time. I liked what he had to say, that he prays in the morning, he feels compelled to do so, has a sense that it's meaningful, and then he gets up off of his knees and says, well, that was a waste of time. He's honest with all the different ideas and thoughts that are incongruent, but nonetheless, he's honest about the fact that these are in him. And I really think that there's more of a continuum here than you decidedly fall to one side or the other. Really. This isn't a binary question.
I agree. We don't want to labor out the show and make it boring. So let's give some thoughts that either ramp it up, inspire, or let's quit the program. What do you say?
Well, I would like to say this, and since you said that, rather than spend a lot of time maybe necessarily trying to figure out who or what God is or what he's like, or determine, convince ourselves that there's not one at all, why not give more thought and attention to what would make us better human beings,
Yeah.
more effective in making this a better place for all to live?
That's good.
Search out ideas and reasons to become closer to one another and more caring, more compassionate individuals.
Yes, I like it.
Absolutely. Yes, I like that too.
And that should
that's
not
really
include
good.
you got to be like me.
Right, right.
That
You
was
know,
awesome,
believe it.
Daryl.
Yeah.
Okay, there's something to talk about, or
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's. I think that this can be as a person who believes, I find that as I explore that belief and as I look into it, it has been to me a delightful discovery to find that this is an extremely irrational condition I find myself in. That it has more to do with just being honest about the fact that that's my gut sense, and it has nothing to do with my feeling like, huh, look, I'm smarter than all you guys. I know I'm right. It has nothing to do with that. I'm totally comfortable with the possibility that that this is just the condition I happen to find myself in, and I'm wrong. So, to me, it is, and I like what Daryl was saying there in that, because the world is suffering bigger questions than this one.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you.
And
Thank
it
you.
is far more important that we focus on those questions. I'm more concerned about the conditions of peace, the conditions of genuine equity, and equalness in this world in terms of the dignity of human beings. And I think we've got a long way to go. And I don't think it can make any difference whether there is or isn't a God as to whether or not people are worthy of being treated with dignity. I don't think that is even a part of the question. It's kind of like what side of your head does your hair part on? And mine kind of parts on both sides. It's really parted in the middle. It's departed, but
You're like a Red Sea.
Well, I wanted to bring up this Jimmy Carter. If there is a God, if there's not a God, he believes in his heart, he is someone that honestly, truly, deep down believes that. And if you saw his press conference about him divulging the fact that he has melanoma in his brain now, he was so confident and so secure and is seemingly at peace. And I'm sure, he's human, so he's going to have these moments of, probably being afraid or questioning. But whether there's a God or not, him believing in God has really, to me, made his life now. This is just one individual I'm giving an example of, have a lot of quality and a lot of, confidence and assurance, and it's worked for Jimmy Carter, especially at this, the sunset of his years. I think he's in a good spot, really.
he's where he's at.
Yeah.
And if that helps him get through it, I say more power to you, Jimmy Carter.
I'm the kind of person that would like to see something in my lifetime in that theism was dethroned in many people's lives, because I think that we have been preoccupied, namely with something that should not control our lives. For instance, we have the Muslim community, and we've had, various people from the Muslim community on our show. And I can't forget, some of the words of a particular imam that we had here. He's convinced that most Muslims are abysmally ignorant when it comes to their handling, that is, of the text, that is, the traditional hermeneutic. And he's afraid that various perspectives, namely of their text, have been formed in a manner to fuel this radical left and right movement that's going on in so many areas of the Middle East. And so I'm not convinced that it's religion that's fueling this. I think that there is much to say about tribalism in this context. When you look at, what so many of the psychologists are saying, that is, you just look at a little bit of political science concerning what happens with human beings in dealing with conflict. There's a very good read that I would suggest for everyone, and that it would be, and I'm trying to remember the author's name, and I can't right off the top of my head, but the name of the book is The Need for Allies and Enemies. It's a wonderful book to read. I don't agree with all of the data in it, but it's certainly something that will stimulate a conversation. But I'm hoping that this place is attempting to establish the kind of paradigm, if you will, that's not just about one tribe. I would like to think that this group is this certain kind of group that says we need to learn something about all groups and open our minds or eyes to how things are operating in many other paradigms. And I'm trying to encourage people actually to take a multi-axial approach toward all things, simply because I think that sometimes we get stuck if we don't look at things from all sides, from how people think on, let's say, a different axes. And so I'm hoping that Theism 2.0 or Mintballism, or whatever you want to call it, is the place that people will want to go. Because if we continue to keep just atheism and theism around, that is in the classical sense, I think we're going to drive each other crazy. And I don't want to spend the rest of my days talking about theism or atheism. I want to move on. I want something that inspires me much, 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 much more than any of the notions that I've heard for the majority of my life. I want something so much better than that, and I see something so much better than that. I would like to share so many things with people that we have that is in this community that I see that is building, not just out of one group, but out of many groups. Because, if it's possible to put a circle around all of humanity and fight for something that would make sense to all of humanity, so we could move past ourselves into a much better paradigm, and to do that in a meaningful way, to me, that would be impressive.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think you were making a reference to an actual magazine article in political psychology of the need for enemies and allies. But and people can find that perhaps at a library. But me too. I feel much the same way. That the only reason why I want to even talk about the issues of God and theism and atheism is because it would be, if I have a goal, if I have an agenda here, it is to alter the conversation away from a debate and try to set the the lay of the land should be one where, although there are some problems with some forms of theism and some forms of atheism, to be an atheist or to be a theist is not to be anything that lacks any kind of dignity or any kind of right. There's no need for us to be attempting to humiliate each other or trying to one up anybody. And I think that it's important that we recognize that that we give space and dignity and stop trying to turn this issue into one that really has any bearing on what's important. We try to accuse atheists of being responsible for too much stuff that has really nothing to do with the fact that they're atheists, and we try to accuse religion of having done certain things because we're trying to make the rest of the world like ourselves, and those arguments lack true critical thinking. People are theists, they are atheists, and this is no justification, no license, and no excuse for any kind of behavior.
Wouldn't it be similar to pushing the issue of black and white rather than just people? And actually, we're really, in reality, we're dealing with anywhere from dark to light brown and sometimes pink. I mean, let's get real.
We're all when we stop talking about it because we don't even have anything to talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
Guess what, guys? It's storming outside here, and we're going to close out the show. So if you have a powerful thought, Daryl, you've shared some wonderful thoughts tonight, by the way. Many people are applauding you. Wow, you've done a great job. Give the best here at the last part of the show, so go for it. No pressure.
I've already used all that up. I'm just going to have to walk down.
Sheriff.
It's just good to be a participant in things, and I find myself more and more just sticking my neck out a little further, and finding great value in that, great sense of completeness and enjoyment of just stretching things a little, where I can help. I help, and I don't know. I think it just makes everything else kind of seem like it needs to be on a different shelf.
I'd like to tell everyone that they need to buy some Umarum mints. That would be best.
It's like
what kind of
Umarum.
What kind of ball?
Yeah.
Well, I do know how to say or um's name now, and so that makes me feel so much better. It's like you're stuttering. It's like
Umarum.
That's pretty short.
That's right.
Hey, Daryl, let me put you on the spot. Sing an Umarum song, and you can only use Umurum's name.
That's a good horn song there, I think.
That sounds like taps. Sad.
That's what comes to my mind. I'm sorry. There we go.
Yes.
We're looking for some powerful thoughts, but when it comes down to it, the real power is not in power. I'd rather know more about the power of love than the love of power. And the truth is, I'm not interested in saying something so powerful that it just causes everyone to say, oh my goodness, you've just convinced me so much. I would rather encourage people to be who they are and to explore their own thinking and to recognize that we don't all think clearly, as none of us think as clearly as we think we do, and that includes me. But give yourself permission to move in the directions that you move in authentically and honestly. And you know what? You'll raise up yourself in the way you should go. And as you move along, at least you won't depart from that theme.
I think it's going to be best to close the show if Umrum will actually do us a favor. If you will post something that would inspire all of us atheists and theists alike to move forward. I want you to post it in this live portion of the show, and also post it again, because after this thing ceases tonight, all of these comments will not be there, unfortunately. And I want you to post that again, because you certainly have made an impression on all of us here at NCG, and we're so thankful to have all of you guys involved in what we do. And so we're going to leave it up to you to make the last statement. We're actually watching the views here, and so we're going to wait until you make that statement, and hopefully you will restate it again when the show goes off, so we can have a permanent statement by you in the archives. Thank you. So the question is, what is he going to write? We're waiting.
We're waiting.
We are awaiting, Bob.
Bated breath.
Okay, yeah. Well, so we'll wait for a couple of comments to come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, now Umarum will know about the pressure that you put people under. Go
Right.
ahead and he always does this. Go ahead and I need something really powerful from you for the first 2 minutes of the show, and then I always like freeze up, like. Oh,
Umarum.
my messages have been
That's a good
suspended for
response to the
posting
question.
too many
Say something
messages.
powerful, and you could just go,
He said that my messages have been suspended for posting too many messages. Okay.
how'd you post that? Wait a minute.
Hey, okay, this is what I want you to do. Please, please
sharp.
post it after the show goes off, because we really do like what you're saying.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. He says, there we go. NCG is great. I really like the way you try to treat the conversation. Okay.
I like the little smiley face. That's nice.
Absolutely. And,
Pronounce that one.
okay. Well, Joe Kuskovan says Jones putting on the spot. He has a way of doing that. It's scary sometimes.
Oh, well, this has been fun tonight. You guys have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.